So, Europe at the crossroads. First, are we truly at a crossroads? And if so, in what sense? What makes this moment that we're living now fundamentally different from past periods of European uncertainty? Because Europe has lived quite several of them. So, could I give the floor first to you, Nicholas?
Okay, thank you very much, Sabine. Well, I think I would use the word, well, I think there are lots of words we could use, but I would say it's more significant than a crossroads. It's an inflection point. And I say that that word might not be adequate because there are just so many dimensions involved. I think the reason why I would say an inflection point is that uh, as this session today, and also we've heard in popular discussion, the term geopolitics comes up. But however, it comes up in a very different way to the pejorative term that we're used to, in the sense that geopolitics is comes out of a particular model from the late 19th, early 20th century, where it's the idea of empires and states constantly expanding their boundaries or borders against one another. What makes this moment a little more complicated is the geo. You could say it's not geopolitical as one word, but it's hyphenated. And the understanding of what is the globe or what is the earth has become far more complex. It's not a stage anymore. We understand it as an ecosystem, as the earth itself. And we've also come to understand that boundaries are come in all shapes and sizes. They're not just state boundaries, and that with climate change and with the Anthropocene, the very stage that we thought was eternal or transhistorical really is a falsehood. And we are kind of reminded with climate change that in the Earth's 4.3 billion years of history, it has only been able to sustain human life for 1% of that time. So the fragility of what we thought was eternal has shaken. And I think that brings into question then, how does the EU react to all those changes in our understanding of what the geo is, what that means for the future of geo slash political?
Excellent. Thank you very much. So could I now give the floor to you, Thomas, to have your views on that question and to see if you also agree on this idea of inflection point and going from stage to ecosystem in a way?
Sure. I think there's almost consensus. What has already been discussed here is that Europe faces enormous challenges, external threats. But at the same time, I want to turn to the internal challenges we are facing. And I think that the rise of populism has a couple of implications. I would even say it leads us to a kind of a catch-22 in the EU, namely that once we want to change anything in the EU, whether it's security, whether it's geopolitical, etc., the system itself more or less endorses the friends of our enemies with power. So, and as such, the bigger challenge might be that we are really at a crossroads, meaning in a terminology that we need radical change in order to cope with these serious challenges, and in particular with the rise of populism, because populism more or less is a very group-specific phenomenon which is spreading hate and animus within the societies and will endanger also the support of the political system. So I didn't think about that, but I made research now over 30 years on European integration. I know all the shortcomings of the political system, but my current conclusion is very broad and bold. And I really come to this conclusion to say we have to create a European republic, or a republic of Europe, which overcomes the national boundaries of the current system, because the national boundaries are the mechanism which more or less fosters a nativist populism these days.
Thank you. I couldn't have dreamt up a nicer start. Such a provoking idea. The Republic of Europe. That's excellent. But let me turn first to Elena to have her views on that question. Are we at the crossroads? Is that really a defining moment? And some of the barriers also are quite tangible in the work you're doing.
To add another perspective, for me, the topic about crossroads is also to take advantage of the opportunity that we have in front of us. I think that besides the threats and the context, I think that the optimism in Europe is that we have to realize that for the last 20 years, I mean, in Europe, we have been fostering innovation, and we have been fostering also climate tech. I mean, this idea about the geo and climate change. And we have had several initiatives. We have the European Institute of Technologies, we have had the EIC, we have had the Green Deal, all the regulation that has made Europe as a benchmark in the world about how to create a regulation that considers the earth, that considers also the climate change, together with the growth and the economy. So this has given results because since the year 2010, the number of innovations and startups that have been tackling the climate change has multiplied by 4. And 40% of those startups are in Europe, are here. I mean, we have brought them. Also, the other thing is that in terms of the technology, Europe is at the forefront of many of those technologies in comparison with US. I mean, and the Draghi report has already highlighted that aspect. If we are talking about the renewables, I mean, at this moment, the share of renewables is the same one that the fossil fuels. So this is that for the last years, Europe has achieved something that it is the reduction of the CO2 emission of 33%. So this is an opportunity for us. And that what I would like to be optimistic is in the sense that we have achieved things. What is the challenge now? The challenge is in the implementation. And in the implementation, because we have the regulation, we have the market conditions, we have the innovators, we have the technology, but we need to make it, to scale it. We need to make a big effort to scale it and to make it much more simple, with much more speed. And that is where I connect with my colleague Thomas, in the sense that we need the instruments and the proper context to do a quick implementation. Because at this moment, there is such a fragmented organization within the European Europe that doesn't facilitate that area. So it is a crossroad, because the interesting thing is that it's binary. If we don't take this opportunity, our situation is going to be worse in terms of the economy. We have already lost the PV industry. We have already difficulties with the wind. The automobile sector today is a question mark. So or we take advantage of it, or otherwise we are going to be in a worse situation.
Thank you very much, Elena. So Thomas, would you elaborate a bit on this idea of the European Republic, and maybe responding to this binary dimension that Elena was depicting? So are we currently equipped, our institutions equipped to navigate these geopolitical changes and these needs? Probably not. So do we need a new strategic framework altogether? How do we get there in your views?
There is two things which we have done ever since the European Union has been formed with the Maastricht Treaty. We have, on the one hand, we have transferred, and Elena said it, more and more competences to the supranational level, important competences. It's not only about climate change, but also migration and other issues. Now we are talking about security and defense. So all these competences, however, need the public support in order to have a proper implementation, because otherwise it's a kind of a cherry picking. So everybody picks and chooses what he wants to implement, or at least lengthens it down. Furthermore, we have this consensus principle in a very heterogeneous European Union, which makes it more and more difficult to achieve compromises. And therefore, I guess what we need to have is a more radical change in the political system, which increases responsiveness to the distinct demands of the people. So today we have more a technocratic system of 27 commissioners without electoral mandate. So we need a little bit more direct impact of the public on European governance in order to take or to create more public support that at the end of the day then also helps to implement, I would say, this vision of this European Republic, because it's a long-term, of course, a long-term vision, but nevertheless, it's a vision which also confronts nativist populism with an alternative and not only with a kind of a muddling through.
Very, very clear. Thank you. Thank you. But Elena, if I may come back to you in this political and geopolitical landscape, how can innovation and particularly Europe's leadership in sustainability and energy transition that you were describing before, can it serve as a sort of a lever for something different, some resilience, but maybe beyond? And again, same question than I had for Thomas. What is needed? How can we achieve that? Are we investing fast and broadly enough? You were mentioning the Draghi report. There's also a call from Enrico Letta about this cohesion and this need for further unfragmented investment. What are your views on this?
Okay, so in terms of innovation and resilience, now we are talking a lot about dual technologies and dual use of technology. So when I started working with the startups, we were very much more focused on climate tech, indeed. But now it is also defense, and it is something about resilience, and it is something about let's make us more independent or with less dependencies in that sense. So there, it is true that we are seeing a big effort, especially what is going to make us more independent. One thing is electrification and the use of renewables, because we have the sun, we have the waves, we have the wind. This is something that then we are not depending specifically on another country, okay? On the fossil fuels. Then the other aspect that we need is storage, because that is come together. And there is a lot of investment and innovation in storage. Indeed, I mean, the technology cost has been reduced in the last 10 years, 89%. Okay, so we have been really developing this area. Something what it is especially relevant for resilience related with geopolitics is the critical raw materials. And this is something why the innovation, we are innovating a lot on new materials that are much more accessible and they are not geographically limited in some regions. And also the resilience of strategic value chains. And that is very important because the thing is that at this moment, for instance, I mean, in the last year, 40 gigawatts of solar panels were established were sold in Europe, which is fantastic because hey, we are having more solar energy. The counterpart is that 95% of those panels were coming from China. So this means 12 billion of euros in terms of trade balance. So this is something that we have to think also about this dimension of the strategic value chains. And that is why now we are investing a lot in industrialization, in bringing industry back, for instance, to Europe. In terms of investment, what is the problem? The problem is that we have done a good job, okay? Because in early stage investment, we have really been accelerating a lot. Indeed, I think that last year we were 43% of the venture capital of all the world, for instance, in this arena, in this clean tech, was in Europe. So this is fantastic. What is the problem? The growth capital. Because then we have many little startups that they are starting, but they don't have the capital in order to grow. And that is where, again, we have to make an effort because a union in capitals would be very interesting. and also the combination of private and public funding, offering some warranties. So this is a bit how I see it. So it's still colorful, but we need to make more efforts.
Thank you very much. Then Nicholas, I'm sure a lot of what has been said regarding dependencies and these geographically limited elements of what Elena has been presenting very much resonate with what you do. But could you share your views on this, and also how do our frameworks also need to evolve in the face of these shifts and these needs? And aren't we seeing that a lot of major powers are bypassing those rules that we had in the world order? And how can we respond to that? And should we even?
Yeah, thank you. So I think one way to connect what has been said with your question, and it's probably the defining challenge that the EU faces, which is a very different one from the time of the Schuman Declaration. So, you know, the world economy today is centered on, in terms of production and trade, on 500 million shipping containers and their circulation. It's a vastly changed world from the factories and company towns that defined the EU in its creation. Now, the significance of those 500 million containers has been very well studied by economists and logistics experts at business schools. But its significance is that fundamental change in moving production and trade away from the state into a kind of trans-territorial space has fundamentally disrupted the institutional bargain that sustained the UN Charter Order and even the EU itself. Because in this sense, it's not just the international rules that are made between states or by states themselves or regions. Corporations today are, many of them are more wealthy than many EU member states. There are bilateral trade agreements, there are private international law, and there is just really a far more complex galaxy of formal and informal rules, which are shaking everything up. And that's what makes it challenging for the EU today, and perhaps feeds into this nativism and populism that Thomas talks about, is that if production, trade, and even military technologies that are designed to secure those supply chains and those routes are increasingly trans-territorial in focus, well, the states behind or the countries or nation states that are part of the EU, the people there start to wonder, well, to what extent do our institutions impact that? And that also affects then what are the rules of the game of the great powers. Because if everything has changed so much that the checkerboard is no longer the checkerboard, it's backgammon, or I don't even know what's the appropriate metaphor anymore, right? People are trying to make new moves, trying to exploit all these gaps which have emerged. So in this sense, it's really why I would say it's an inflection point is that the founding assumptions of the institutional bargain that were kind of a core background to international law in its contemporary context and for the EU have been disrupted. And we're kind of in a state where a new bargain is being struggled over, or bargains are being struggled over. And and we're seeing the symptoms of that manifest itself in different types of world events.
Thank you very much for this. But then let me continue with a question to you and also to the other panelists. But if the checkerboard has been moved so much, and if those bargains, those foundations are changing so much, what can we do as universities? What is then our role? How can we contribute to foster the best moves forward as we are at this crossroad? Are we powerless in this big backgammon game or whichever game? What can we do?
Uh, I think I think that defines perhaps the overlooked significance of universities in general, and especially in a moment like this where so many as I would say, where so many things are changing, where so many institutional assumptions are being disrupted. This is where interdisciplinary knowledge becomes very important. Because in that sense, having literacy in multiple expertise or disciplines or types of knowledge become very useful because then you start to see the assumptions that were working together to sustain the world you thought you had on a kind of sustainable basis. So universities are very important at this point because we can bring together different types of knowledges and ways of seeing precisely because you need it in moments where things aren't going according to the IKEA instructions, right? You kind of have to do things you really have to you really have to go sometimes things are ad hoc, sometimes things have to be improvised, but they aren't the kind of structure or system that we assume to be kind of trans-historical is becoming evidently not there. So universities are super important. And this actually, I think, hopefully will illustrate that one of the important things about impact when it comes to universities is having an impact on the young minds of Europe, that they have the dexterity, they have the flexibility, they have the broadness of thought to kind of parse through all these puzzles now that we're dealing with. And so, yeah, I think that's where universities will be very important in the future, is really expanding that dexterity and I think we almost have to be martial artists of some kind in the future. We really have to master many different moves.
But let me first say or add, I would even go a little bit further, saying not only the universities, but science at all, right? So, and scientific knowledge, which is of course also produced and mainly produced at universities. But I can speak, for instance, for my own discipline very frankly. So for a long, long time, more or less in economics, the political system was given. The working of the rule of law and the institutional foundations were set fixed, right? Today we see that this is an open question. We don't know what will come next in the United States or China or Russia. So, and these are big factors which of course will hit the whole global world. And having evidence-based knowledge about institutions, their workings, that it's not only whatever empowering the European Parliament, what at the end of the day will produce democracy. So we need a little bit more than that, right? Is more or less very, very important. And therefore I can only support also this interdisciplinary moment. Or I know it's hard. You know, it's always we have to learn other languages. You know, it's an investment into another discipline, and you never know whether it will pay off. But without, I guess, in the long run, at least, it will not pay off at all. Yeah, if we stay only within the disciplines, right?
Yeah, I agree with my two colleagues, and especially in this moment, we really need the university, because we really need this kind of critical thinking about offering another different scenarios, because the world is changing. I mean, in my field, when we are analyzing an energy transition, has brought always in the history changes in the economy and changes in the values of the society. So it is purely multidisciplinary, because we are talking about engineers, we are talking about technical science, we are talking about social scientists, political science, we are talking about anthropology, we are talking about, I mean, many of those. So at the end, as Thomas was saying, it is very easy to say that we need much more multidisciplinary. It is much more complex to do it. I have been living in that context because I am a social scientist working with technical universities, technical inventors, and it took us a lot of time to understand each other, even if we were all of us speaking English. So it was a kind of lost in translation. I say, hey, we are not talking the same, even if we are using the same words. But then the magic happens. And I think that is the relevant thing. That is where we are really disruptive. So if we agree on that setting, the next question is to what extent also our institutional context in the university foster that type of collaboration. So we are talking a lot about Europe, that we have to change. Hey, we should also change as a university. And coming to Nicola's concept about impact, what is the impact that we want to create as in the academia, no? And that is what is the role of the university. I am, for instance, I try to foster the thing that in the university we create these disruptive ideas, these disruptive futures, social changes. But also, we need to be much more active, and we need to work much more with the industry, and that is a part also of the complexity. And listen to the problems and trying to bring more what we create in our universities to bring them to the world, and that is another challenge. But that is part of also of the innovation.
Thank you very much for those great insights. I see that time is flying when you're actually enjoying yourself and having great conversation. What I would have a lot of follow-up questions, but I think now it's time for me to open the floor to the audience for their questions as well, and maybe I'll get back to mine at a later stage. And I think we can take your questions if you want to come to the screen, or we can also take them via the chat should you be preferring that modality. I see Augusta raising her hand.
Hello, I've been listening ever since the start. Thank you so much for the opportunity. It's been a very interesting conversation. I'm a student at Tilburg University, actually, and obviously all these times are pressing on our academic life as well, and there's a lot of stress involved. And I'm coming from Eastern Europe, I'm coming from Romania, and populism has risen quite a lot in there as well. And I feel like in academic life, we don't really talk about this enough, especially as I'm doing sociology. So in my program, I have a question for Mr. Nicholas, since he's also like the teacher from Tilburg University. What strategies, how can we implement this active discussion? Because I think it is quite important that we, as a community of Tilburg University, foster this conversation and this spaces for these conversations.
Well, thank you very much, Augusta. That's a $1 million question, which I will attempt to provide maybe my $10 to, in terms of how I might be able to answer. Well, I think the first step, I mean, so I can absolutely relate to your concern about populism and nativism. I'm somebody who has lived and worked in Europe for 20 years. As somebody with a Canadian passport, and so I've been a kind of passive sociologist, kind of observing EU over the last 20 years and what's going on. I would say the first step, and I think your cue to about the conversation is one we need to take is academic freedom and independence. I think you can appreciate, and one thing that certainly concerned me is it has become increasingly difficult to have rigorous, robust, evidence-based conversations in a way where we're trying to think hard about the problems that people are confronting on every level. So I think that would be a first step in doing that is providing returning a kind of safety and independence to these kind of discussions where we can have them critically and without concern about what we witnessed in different contexts. I think however, the problem that you're talking about and your concern about populism or just generally even frustration with the European Union that we might see in certain countries, has to do, well, can only be addressed by our willingness to really engage in these difficult and complex conversations across institutions, and to think also as not just as professors, but as leaders about how we can engage people and that they can feel included in the decisions that matter in their life. And that's easier said than done. Inclusion is both an objective institutional thing, but it's also a subjective institutional effect. And in a time when things are very turbulent, people are feeling pressures from many different directions, and sometimes they feel the pressure and they don't even know the direction it's coming from. That makes it very challenging to ensure that we are both objectively and subjectively inclusive and receptive as a university or as a political leader, so that people feel that they are part of some kind of meaningful conversation.
Thank you very much.
That's my $10 to the $1 million question.
Can I just have a follow-up question just really quickly?
Of course.
Because I do agree that that's basically the common mentality, especially in my program, because I'm doing sociology. A lot of people are interested in the social political events that are happening right now. But the question is, how do we create these spaces? Is there any way that we as students can talk to academia and create some of these open communication environments, such as events, because we have a lot of events planning with the university, because I think that would be quite helpful to have particular events, particular moments dedicated specifically to have these kind of conversations.
Well, for my part, I mean, the title of professor can sound impressive, but in practice, it has a limited jurisdiction. So in that sense, at least for my part, in the terms of the space that I can control, in my classrooms, in my seminars, I really go to great lengths and push people that we really have tough conversations, but in a way that's respectful, but that is rigorous, and that we can feel that we can talk about difficult things for the purposes of trying together to figure out how to move on, right? Now, I agree with you. How do we extend that ethos beyond simply my lecture hall or my seminar room? I mean, that's a challenge that I think all universities are grappling with in a context where they are trying to navigate difficult political waters, in the sense that because universities have been seen as impactful, well, also we have to navigate then the straits of politics sometimes because we have an impact on young people and on society at large. So I think students can work together with their professors, but also insist with their university leadership that it's not enough to just be quiet. It's not enough to hide. We should talk. That's what universities are about. It's about ideas. It's about thinking about what is a better tomorrow? How does that look like? So yeah, absolutely. But as I said, professor sounds impressive, but it's a limited jurisdiction. I do my best.
Okay, thank you very much for your answer.
And if I may, from a European University Alliance perspective that has also some bodies for the students, of course, a lot of courses and spaces to discuss, but also jointly across Europe, we have a board of learners with representatives that are organizing conferences to discuss these aspects. We have representatives that are going to meet in the Strasbourg European Parliament and propose some concrete resolutions for the politicians at European level to look at. So there are some vectors also where you can engage a bit beyond the classroom space. So please get in contact with us and the Board of Learners of Engage EU, and would be very, very interesting to have your views and work on these questions, very important questions together. Thank you very much, Augusta.
Thank you very much as well.
Yes. Are there other questions for our panelists? Moritz?
Yes, thank you. So I have a question to Thomas König. You mentioned earlier on the idea of the European Republic, and you described the challenges of having to decide everything unanimously. And I totally see that point. My question would be, how do we get there? So in particular, do you see any realistic chance for getting out of this situation where every single one can veto any decision and thereby block any progress or block any more fundamental changes? So is it more an ideal that you described, or do you see any realistic path at least in that direction?
Yes, thank you very much for this question. I mean, traditionally and currently, we observe at least two perspectives on how to solve that. One is called more or less the coalition of the willing, right? We already practice this at the moment in some areas. And that means more or less we will operate outside the EU first, right? Because that is not the format where the decision making is done. So one can do that, I guess, for a while, for practical purposes, but not over long run, right? So then you run into whatever legal problems, and also the idea that more or less you have whatever a common legal framework which reduces information and costs about this legal frameworks which otherwise exists, yeah, will disappear. So what we know today, however, is the current EU system has a heavy load towards, let's call it whatever, technocratic policymaking. So more or less we have this European Commission without electoral mandate. We have a court which drives European integration forward, but we have little say of the public in the decision-making process. So the idea is indeed, and also to overcome the concerns which will come, or the criticism of populist parties about that, would be indeed to strengthen the parliamentary foundation of the European Union, meaning practically, first of all, the European Parliament receives the right of initiative. That's the first step, right? And one can do that easily. A second would be, once we agree that the European Commission should be elected out of the majority of the parliament, right? We have a direct governmental, let's say, transfer of responsibility here. And so we will increase more or less the responsiveness to the public. And I guess that exactly contradicts, or at least cannot be contradicted by populist parties and blocked, which they do currently by already having a lot of say in some governments. So I think there is the solution, and we have this evidence. So it's not, you know, there are also very practical features we can recommend. For instance, to reduce tertiary legislation in order to decrease the number of bureaucratic legal acts, et cetera, with sunshine clauses. So there's a lot of evidence how to improve it. The problem is currently, I guess, that a little bit we overestimate the 20-25% populist support, so that the majority is not, let's say, ready enough to present such a vision, right? So more or less they are too shy to dream this, because they fear that at the ballot box, this will raise a couple of points of populist parties in the member states. So I guess that they overestimate this, the share they have, like in Germany, the 25%, in France, the 30% or whatsoever. But it's still, there is, and that is what we show in our analysis, there is a wide majority supporting European integration and further integration. And as such, Donald Trump and Putin are very helpful for pushing forward this idea, because I think that people more and more align along this idea as the external pressure increases in Europe.
Thank you.
Is it possible for me to jump in? I want to just add something.
Absolutely.
I wanted to add something to
Please.
what Thomas has said. I think that's why universities are also particularly important, because if to further European solidarity, that's going to be the students who do this, and in this sense, that's where an alliance like this, or just universities across Europe in general, become important in the sense of showing the future generation how to dream in a way that you can be a national or of any kind, but also be a European, and that you can have mutual responsibilities for one another, and that's fine, and then in fact we grow stronger if we think that way. And I think back again as somebody with a Canadian passport. You know, that was always the trick of Quebec in Canada, right? You can be a Quebecer and you can be a Canadian. You can be proud of both, and you can advance both causes. And when I think about the Schuman Declaration, you know, one of the things that Schuman emphasized was how everything has to be about the creation of solidarity. That the EU is about creating this solidarity. And I think what Thomas proposes in terms of the parliament, but I think universities are important, that we foster this sense of how to think solidarity in this way. And that's the challenge that I think we still haven't overcome in Europe. It's a big job still waiting for us.
If I can jump, now that we can jump.
Please.
I think that it is a topic of identity also. I mean, to what extent we feel European. And I think that, as Thomas said, Putin and Trump is making us a favor on that direction. But I think that the university and the educational system is one of the key pieces here. I mean, the Erasmus program, for instance, I mean, the Marie Curie. I mean, and then, I mean, these kind of alliances like we have here. The only thing is that somehow perhaps we need to be to materialize and visualize more those examples where working together, connecting the dots in the different countries, different faculties in different universities and countries, we have created something together, which is bigger than just adding dots. And I think that we always have a challenge here in Europe, is that we always think that the grass is greener on the other side. And sometimes even we are much more Catholic than the Pope. I'm talking especially at this moment of time, no? It's like, hey, let's identify which are some of the good examples that we have, and let's put it there. And I think that the university is crucial. And it is also that a comment is that if we should give more voice to the people, to the different individuals, this comes also with responsibility. And I think that is also very important. This means that then we need real data, we need robust discussions, we need exactly all this kind of also education in order to take the right decisions. I have already experienced that when we are talking about energy topics, we sometimes lead away from these kind of robust discussions. It is more about opinions. It is more about sometimes even political likes and dislikes. No, I mean, there are hard data coming from the scientists, coming from research, coming from science. And I think that this is also something that we have to consider, the responsibility that comes with that, with having the microphone.
Let me give you some empirical insights into this, because we just published a cross-national experiment on solidarity and trust in Europe. And the impressive finding is that the level of solidarity and trust both is almost as much between Europeans than between co-nationals. So more or less, but it discriminates against out Europeans, which is the other side of a European identity, right? You not only have high solidarity and trust within Europe, but you also feel more far away from outside Europe, right? And therefore you do not support so much what is outside of it. which is good news, I think, and it's more or less what you say. It's more it's the foundation. It's already there, and it's in the public. So these are experiments in surveys, so in representative surveys. So it's already in. But as I said, I think the message has not yet been transferred to the political level, and I think that's also a task of universities, right? That we send credible messages about such findings.
Excellent. I personally learned a lot, and it's interesting to see that perceptions and opinions are much more at the forefront than just actually data. And this is very heartwarming that solidarity and trust are so strong. And also for you, Elena, what you were giving as elements for innovation, it feels like the grass is always greener in the Silicon Valley, even though these days there's a couple of question marks about some of what it has created. But it is fantastic to have had the opportunity to listen to your insights. I think we will definitely have to continue this conversation and really also craft our messages, because what I also take from your insights is that not only does the university has a role, but universities together across countries, across disciplines, with intentional links to the industry as well, and to the governments. This articulation and intentionality we need to clearly work on. So it is wonderful in my role to know that we have a place and a role to play to also inspire our students, our communities, our governments, and go past some of those walls. I think it will be time to wrap up very soon. Are there some more questions from the audience or the colleagues to one another? It was wonderful to see how transdisciplinarity was in motion already in our discussions.
This is Carlo Gallucci. Unfortunately, I don't succeed to raise the hand. Even let me check. Well, now you can see me.
We see you.
I have a question. First of all, thank you very much for all been said. But one of the reasons why we create such alliances is because our terrible demographic pyramid, which is, our bid rate is very, very low, and we need to attract talent from everywhere. So the question is how to work not only in attracting the talent, maybe decisions that in other areas of the world are taking nowadays are helping us to attract new talent to Europe, let's put it this way. But then the problem is to retain the talent. So we should work a bit on how to attract, but also to prevent and to be prepared beforehand on what do we do then to keep and to retain this eventually talent we've been able to attract. This is my question and my concern, honestly, to be honest, as a member of one university.
It is a very good question, and there is no one silver bullet that solves it. But my experience has been, for instance, we have been able to attract students and talent from all around the world when we are offering them something unique. And I think that, for instance, the young people that they want to change the world, and the young people that they say, okay, Europe, for instance, is offering us advantages in terms of a market that it is fighting against climate change, an economy that wants to be green, something that it is keeping the diversity. Because, I mean, politically, look at what it's doing the US, for instance. Now, a student outside the US going to the US has a lot of problems. Ursula von der Leyen was shouting the other day, hey, scientists, young people, come to Europe. So I think that if we are able to offer a proposition that it is aligned with the values of the young generations, then it is going to be much more easier to attract them. Together with what Thomas and Nicholas were saying about a robust university, a robust context, because I mean, sometimes when we are thinking that the best universities and they are in the US, no, I mean, that is not the reality. So we have to sell us also much better. A bit of marketing, and Carlos, you know what I'm talking about because you're an expert in marketing, should be very good and open the door. Today, when everybody is closing the door, Europe opening the door, I think that it is a great sign to attract talent.
Let me say that I think that we have a big chance, and we had it in the past yet, when we had big projects which attracted young people from all over the world, in particular from Asia, because we were credible for their career making. So we had an environment where they could really improve and publish, and we could still be more open-minded and offer those people long-term job opportunities, which is not the case yet always. So, but it was more or less interesting to see how, in particular, people from Asia preferred, after they made their PhD in the United States, to come to Europe, and as a kind of a upheating career-making step, are now moving back to, or moved back to Asia. So that's the second part of your question, how to retain them. And there I would say Europe must be much more fair in not discriminating people from abroad. And then I guess we have a good chance to keep these people here. But it's a long way, right? It's a long way. And nevertheless, here the outside conditions, I think, improve for Europe. And hopefully these alliances establish what I would call an active recruitment principle, so that people who are willing to publish and to do research, that they have a very good chance then to make a career. And I think that is the way it should work, and that will be the successful way to attract young people coming here.
If I may jump in as well for Carlo, this is certainly a question that I've been observing as someone who did a master's in Hungary, a PhD in Italy, postdoc in Austria, and then worked in Belgium, the UK, and the Netherlands. It's something I've always observed, and I think there's an organizational question that this alliance, but all European universities might do well to consider. And it's something I've always been struggling with at every institution I've been in Europe is, do you want to be, for example, a great Italian university, or do you want to be a world-class university in Italy or in the EU? And it might sound like semantics, but actually it makes a world of difference in the sense that, you know, you don't water down the strength of university by being world class. And it's a struggle, I think, that maybe this alliance can help massage, because I don't think those things are contradictory, but I think some colleagues think they do, and I just don't think that's a winning proposition.
Thank you very much. If I just can add, we had this dilemma 20 years ago, something more, when at the Sada Business School, both Elena and I belong to Sada Business School, although I am acting now as vice rector of the university. We had to decide, do we stay as we are, or do we want to become a global player? And if you want to become a global player, everything is to be changed, starting from the inside, starting from the culture. And this is something we should think without losing our European identity, but be able to be a very strong value proposition for everybody to come and stay. That's something we have to work on. But before, we have to clean our house, let's say. We have to prepare ourselves before we go outside. Thank you.
And the local community wins. In the end of the day, the local still wins. It's not a zero-sum game.
Exactly. We agree. That's our experience, at least.
Wonderful. Well, so nice. Thank you for that great question and the very insightful answers. I think this propels us into a very positive dynamic for Europe and for ourselves. Let's start being the change and work on what we can bring for the world and bridging those gaps and going beyond silos in our disciplines, in our countries, and across sectors. So I wouldn't have dreamt of a better message for this celebration of Europe Day for the Engage EU community. Let me thank you warmly for your excellent contribution, dear speakers, and also to the colleagues and people in the audience for their triggering questions. It has been a pleasure, and we wish you a great continuation of the day. And let's keep in touch and continue the conversation through Engage and other channels. Thank you very much.